In a move that underscores Washington's willingness to impose its will on European partners, U.S. President-elect Donald Trump has issued a stark warning to the European Union: dramatically increase purchases of American oil and natural gas, or face the imposition of tariffs. Trump's message, delivered via Truth Social, signals that the U.S. is prepared to leverage its vast energy resources and trade might to shape EU buying behavior, leaving the bloc in a position where it appears to have little choice but to comply. If you are new to our channel, please leave a like as well as a sub so you never miss another video. The United States, currently one of the world's leading producers of crude oil and a top exporter of liquefied natural gas, has repeatedly emphasized its desire to address what it considers an unfair trade balance with Europe. Trump's call for large-scale purchases of U.S. oil and gas is framed as a corrective measure to this tremendous deficit. If Europe does not meet these demands, he warns, the next step will be the aggressive application of tariffs, a move that the EU is still reeling from earlier unilateral U.S. trade actions and is keen to avoid. This threat echoes tensions that erupted in 2017 during Trump's previous term, when the U.S. imposed duties on European steel and aluminum under the guise of national security. Back then, the EU was caught off guard, prompting it to bolster its trade defense strategies, including the development of tools like the anti-coercion instrument and the foreign subsidies regulation. However, these measures offer limited respite in a landscape where America's energy and trade leverage has sharply increased. Europe's predicament is particularly acute because it cannot easily diversify its energy supply. The war in Ukraine and subsequent EU sanctions on Russia have effectively cut off much of Europe's access to Russian gas, forcing the bloc to look elsewhere at a time of rising energy demand and price volatility. The EU finds itself wedged between two unpalatable choices: lift or soften sanctions on Russia to restore a cheaper energy flow, an action likely to provoke Washington's ire, or maintain those sanctions and rely even more heavily on U.S. fossil fuels, ceding the upper hand to Trump's demands. This catch-22 scenario underscores that the EU's theoretical defense mechanisms against U.S. trade coercion ring hollow when energy security is on the line. European officials are bracing themselves for the potential fallout. German Foreign Minister Annalena Baerbock has stated that if the new U.S. administration pursues an aggressive America-first trade approach, Europe must respond with unity. European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen has publicly contemplated replacing Russian LNG imports with cheaper American LNG, yet this stance, while offering a path to reduce Russia's influence, also locks Europe into a costly pattern of dependence on Washington's goodwill. In essence, the EU's strategic options are shrinking under U.S. pressure. With Russian pipelines blocked by sanctions of its own making, Europe can neither easily resume buying cheap Russian gas without inviting American retaliation, nor can it defy Washington's demands without risking severe tariffs. Ultimately, the U.S. appears to be dictating the terms, while the EU, though conceptually equipped with new regulatory tools, faces a stark reality. It can either meet American demands or brace for a costly trade war in which its available choices have already been severely narrowed. The origins of the EU-Russia energy relationship can be traced back to the 1990s and early 2000s, following the dissolution of the Soviet Union in 1991. The newly formed Russian Federation and the EU pursued a pragmatic relationship aimed at fostering stability and economic growth. During the 1990s, the EU and Russia signed the Partnership and Cooperation Agreement, which laid the groundwork for dialogue on political, trade, and economic matters. Energy formed a cornerstone of this developing rapport, as Europe increasingly tapped into Russian gas fields to meet growing energy demand. By the early 2000s, Russia had emerged as one of the EU's main natural gas providers, delivering substantial volumes through extensive pipeline networks. Russia's vast energy reserves, combined with Europe's need for reliable and relatively affordable supplies, created a symbiotic, if asymmetrical, partnership. This deepening energy interdependence would prove to be a double-edged sword in the years to come. Pipelines such as Yamal Europe and the first Nord Stream pipeline, operational from 2011, allowed Russian gas to flow steadily into the European market, providing a stable supply for consumers and industry. European policymakers often viewed Russian energy as both an economic opportunity and a vulnerability. While Russian gas supported Europe's energy security in terms of quantity, concerns grew regarding over-reliance on a single external supplier. High-profile disruptions in 2006 and 2009, when disputes between Russia and transit countries, particularly Ukraine, briefly curtailed gas flows to Europe, highlighted these vulnerabilities. These interruptions did not immediately break the ties, but they did raise awareness within the EU about the need for diversification strategies and greater resilience in energy infrastructure. The annexation of Crimea by Russia in 2014 and the subsequent conflict in eastern Ukraine significantly strained EU-Russia relations. In response, the EU imposed economic sanctions on Russia, targeting sectors such as finance, defense, and energy technologies. While Russian gas continued to flow relatively unhindered, the political context changed. Trust eroded, and the EU intensified efforts to diversify its energy mix to reduce the strategic risks associated with Russian imports. From 2014 onwards, Brussels embarked on policies and investments to enhance energy security, including diversification initiatives that increased LNG import capacity, expanded pipeline connections with Norway and North Africa, and explored imports from the United States, the Middle East, and Central Asia. While Russia remained a leading supplier, routinely providing around 30% to 40% of the EU's natural gas, these measures laid the groundwork for a more flexible and less Russia-dependent energy landscape. Although initial sanctions stopped short of completely banning Russian gas, given Europe's immediate dependency, subsequent measures and voluntary decisions by EU member states sharply curtailed purchases. As December concludes, so does the long-standing gas transit contract between Russia's Gazprom and Ukraine's Naftogaz, a framework that once played a pivotal role in keeping Europe's energy supplies stable for decades. The Ukrainian transit route served as a key corridor for Russian natural gas heading west, providing European consumers with a dependable, if sometimes politically fraught, source of fuel. Today, both Russia and Ukraine have made it clear that they do not intend to renew the agreement. This development comes at a moment when the European Union is already under considerable strain to secure affordable and reliable energy. The EU's long-standing efforts to diversify away from Russian gas have intensified following geopolitical tensions and the war in Ukraine, but these strategies have proven challenging to implement quickly or cheaply. With the Russian-Ukrainian transit contract ending, Europe loses yet another traditional supply channel at a time when energy costs are high, infrastructure adjustments are ongoing, and alternative sources still carry uncertainties in price and availability. For Moscow, allowing the contract to lapse is part of a broader shift toward routes that bypass Ukrainian territory. For Kiev, the end of this agreement helps sever a complicated economic link, even as it means losing transit fees and adjusting to life without this long-standing revenue stream. For the EU, however, the timing could hardly be more difficult. Energy markets remain tight. Alternative supplies, whether liquefied natural gas from abroad or pipeline imports from other regions, often command a premium, and the bloc is still implementing policy changes to support long-term energy security. Trump's tariff threats and demands that the European Union purchase greater volumes of American oil and natural gas compound the EU's existing energy challenges in several ways. 1. Reduced supplier options. The EU is already struggling to diversify energy sources after scaling back Russian imports. Trump's pressure to buy U.S. fossil fuels effectively narrows Europe's range of choices, making it more difficult for the EU to secure supplies on its own terms. Instead of seeking the best value options from multiple suppliers, Europe may feel cornered into accepting U.S. imports to avoid punitive tariffs. 2. Higher energy costs. Forced procurement of U.S. oil and LNG could lead to higher prices for consumers and industries within the EU. While American LNG can help fill the gap left by diminished Russian supplies, it often comes at a premium compared to pipeline gas. Should the EU succumb to U.S. pressure, it risks locking itself into costlier arrangements that strain the budgets of households and businesses already grappling with high energy bills. 3. Reduced policy autonomy. Trump's ultimatum erodes the EU's ability to craft its own energy security strategy. Instead of diversifying based purely on economic and security considerations, the EU may feel compelled to alter its market-based approach due to political pressure. This compromises the Union's long-term plans for sustainable and renewable energy development, as it must now factor in the threat of tariffs if it fails to meet U.S. demands. 4. Geopolitical vulnerability. By forcing the EU to become more dependent on a single external supply, this time the United States rather than Russia, Trump's policy replaces one vulnerability with another. The EU's longer-term goal is to eliminate this kind of leverage altogether, but in the short term, it moves from one geopolitical energy bind into a different, though still constraining, situation. 5. Distracted focus on sustainable transition. The EU's broader ambition is to transition to cleaner energy sources and eventually reduce dependence on volatile fossil fuel markets. Being compelled to buy more U.S. fossil fuels risks diverting investments and attention away from renewables, energy efficiency, and infrastructure improvements, potentially slowing the pace of its green transition. The European Union finds itself in a precarious position, trapped between the conflicting demands of its trusted ally, the United States, and the strategic imperatives of its own energy security and long-term sustainability. As it navigates this complex landscape, the EU must carefully balance its economic interests, geopolitical considerations, and environmental commitments, all while fending off the coercive tactics of an increasingly assertive Washington. The outcome of this tug-of-war will have far-reaching implications, not only for the future of EU-US relations, but also for the global energy landscape and the broader pursuit of a sustainable, resilient, and equitable energy future. The choices made by European leaders in the coming months will shape the continent's trajectory for years to come, with the potential to either strengthen or undermine the EU's strategic autonomy and its ability to chart its own course in an increasingly turbulent world. Thanks for watching till the end. If you enjoyed this video, please leave a like as well as a sub so more people can see this.